The North Atlantic in March 1943 was not merely cold. It was a living thing, a predator with teeth made of ice and claws fashioned from thousand-foot waves. And on the night of March 16th, it had found its prey. Convoy HX 229 stretched across 12 miles of black water like a necklace of dim stars. 40 merchant ships, laden with the lifeblood of a dying Britain. Grain, steel, ammunition, aircraft parts. Each vessel rode low in the water, groaning under cargo that could mean the difference between Britain's survival and its slow starvation under Nazi blockade. Captain Robert Frank stood on the bridge of the SS William Eustace, his hands gripping the frozen rail until his knuckles turned white. At 47, he'd crossed the Atlantic 63 times. But tonight felt different. The hair on the back of his neck wouldn't lie flat. "Sir," his first mate, Tommy Chen, appeared at his elbow. "Radio room is picking up something. Coded traffic. A lot of it." Franks felt his stomach drop. Coded traffic meant U-boats, and a lot of coded traffic meant a wolf pack. What Captain Franks didn't know, what no one in the convoy could have known, was that Admiral Karl Donitz had assembled the largest wolf pack in naval history. 44 German U-boats had been deployed in 3 patrol lines code-named Raubgraf, Stürmer, and Dränger. Their orders were simple and brutal. Annihilate HX 229 and the trailing convoy SC 122. No survivors. No mercy. The first torpedo struck at 21:47 hours. The James Oglethorpe, a Liberty ship carrying 9,000 tons of steel and explosives, disappeared in a column of fire that turned night into day. The shockwave shattered windows on ships 2 miles away. Men on deck were thrown like ragdolls. And then came the screaming. "Hard to starboard!" Franks bellowed. But even as he gave the order, he saw them. Periscope wakes, cutting through the water like shark fins. Not 1, not 2, 7, 8. Impossible. The Harry Luckenbach erupted next, her cargo of ammunition cooking off in a fireworks display of death. Burning men threw themselves into water so cold it would kill them in 4 minutes. Those who couldn't swim burned. Those who could swim froze. The convoy's 4 escort destroyers, HMS Volunteer, HMS Pennywort, HMS Anemone, and HMS Vimy, charged into the chaos like terriers attacking wolves. Depth charges thundered, sending geysers of white water skyward. But there were too many U-boats, too many targets, too much ocean. Commander Gordon Luther aboard HMS Volunteer made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had to choose: chase the submarines or rescue the dying. The naval manual was clear. Doctrine was ruthless. The convoy must keep moving. The dead would have to bury themselves. All ships maintain course and speed. The radio crackled. "Do not stop for survivors." Captain Franks watched through binoculars as men in the water waved at passing ships, their screams swallowed by wind and engine noise. Some tried to swim toward the rescue, their arms windmilling frantically before the cold stole their strength. Others simply raised one hand in a final salute before slipping beneath the surface. But then something happened that no one expected. The radio operator on the William Eustace picked up a transmission that shouldn't have existed. It was the James Oglethorpe the first ship hit, the one that had exploded, the one that by all rights should have been resting on the ocean floor. "This is Oglethorpe. Engine room intact. Steering damaged. We're still afloat. For God's sake, we're still afloat." Tommy Chen stared at the radio speaker like it had grown teeth. "That's impossible. We saw her blow." Franks grabbed the microphone. "Oglethorpe, this is Eustace. How many souls aboard?" Static. Then 32 in the aft section. Forward section is gone. "Sir, the ship won't die. She won't go down." Through the darkness and smoke, Franks could see it now. The shattered bow of the James Oglethorpe. her forward half simply gone, blown away. But the stern section, impossibly, stubbornly, remained afloat, wallowing in the swells like a wounded whale that refused to accept its fate. And she wasn't alone. All across the convoy, ships that should have sunk kept fighting. The Belgian crew, torpedoed twice, her engine room flooded, somehow maintained 5 knots. The Granville, her entire bridge destroyed, steered from the emergency position in the aft deckhouse. The Nareva, burning from bow to stern, her crew manning fire hoses while the ship still made way. It was as if the convoy had decided, collectively, that it would not die, that the Atlantic, for all its fury, would not claim them this night. But the Wolfpack wasn't finished. Not by half. As midnight approached, the U-boat commanders surfaced to recharge batteries and compare notes. They had sunk 9 ships outright and damaged a dozen more. By morning, they assured each other the ocean would be thick with corpses and wreckage. They didn't account for human stubbornness. They didn't account for the convoy that refused to die. Dawn came like a reluctant witness, gray and ashamed. Captain Franks hadn't slept. None of them had. The night had been an endless carousel of explosions, radio calls, and the steady thump of depth charges that you felt in your bones before you heard them with your ears. The William Eustace had been lucky. Not a single torpedo had come their way. But luck in a convoy was a zero-sum game. What missed, you hit someone else. Count, Frank said quietly to Tommy Chen. Chen didn't need to ask what he meant. He'd been keeping tally on a clipboard, crossing off names as ships went dark. His hand shook as he read. 13 confirmed lost, sir. 7 more. Uncertain. Either sunk or just maintaining radio silence. 20 ships, half the convoy, gone in 9 hours. But here was the thing that made Franks' skin crawl. Mathematically, it should have been worse. Much worse. The Elin K had taken a torpedo to her starboard side that blew a hole you could drive a truck through. By every calculation, every naval architecture textbook ever written, she should have rolled over in 3 minutes. Instead, her chief engineer, a Norwegian named Harold Svensson, had done something that shouldn't have worked. He'd blown the ballast tanks on the port side, deliberately flooding them to counterbalance the starboard damage. The Elin K now sailed at a 15-degree list. Her deck canted like a drunk man's smile, but she sailed. The Matthew Luckenbach was even more impossible. She'd been hit by not 1, but 2 torpedoes, 20 minutes apart. The first had demolished her engine room. The second had destroyed her steering. Dead in the water with no way to maneuver should have meant a third torpedo to finish the job. Instead, her captain, a former tugboat operator from Brooklyn named Sam Horowitz, had ordered his crew to rig the emergency tiller. 20 men, working in shifts, manually turned the rudder using a system of ropes and pulleys that would have looked primitive on an 18th century sailing ship. They'd been doing it for 6 hours straight. "We're not moving fast," Horowitz had radioed. "But we're moving. And moving in the right direction, mostly." Commander Luther on the HMS Volunteer couldn't understand it. He'd studied U-boat tactics at Dartmouth. He'd memorized the kill ratios, the attack patterns, the mathematics of submarine warfare. This Wolfpack should have achieved 70% casualties by now. They were sitting at less than 35%. And then he realized the Germans couldn't understand it either. His sonar operator, a kid from Manchester named Davies, had been tracking the U-boats all night. "Sir, they're confused. I can hear them pinging each other, long conversations. They keep circling back to check on ships they think they sank." Because the submarines were running out of torpedoes. Each U-boat carried 14 torpedoes. They'd fired over 300 at the convoy. Under normal circumstances, with a hit rate of 40%, they should have sunk 56 ships. But these ships refused to follow the script. They'd been hit and kept going. They'd been killed and refused to die. U-526, under the command of Captain Lieutenant Hans Troger, surfaced 2,000 yards from the Belgian crew. Through his binoculars, Troger watched the merchant ship limp along, trailing oil, listing badly, her smokestack belching black clouds. he'd personally put 2 torpedoes into her. "She should be on the bottom," his first officer muttered. Trojer said nothing. He was thinking about torpedo rationing, about the long journey back to port, about Admiral Dönitz, and what he would say when Trojer reported that he'd fired all his weapons and the convoy was still moving. A flash of light caught his attention. The destroyer, HMS Vimy, had spotted them. Dive, dive, dive. The submarine dropped like a stone, but not before Trojer saw something that would give him nightmares for years. On the deck of the Belgian crew, a crew member had climbed onto the cargo winch. He was waving, not for help, not in distress, in defiance. A one-fingered salute to the U-boat that had tried to kill him. Below deck on the William Eustace, the crew had gathered around the galley radio. Someone had rigged an antenna to pick up German naval traffic. They couldn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. The U-boats were arguing. "They're panicking," said the ship's radio operator, a former jazz musician from New Orleans named Marcus Washington. He'd learned some German from a girlfriend in Hamburg before the war. They're saying ghost ships. They keep using that phrase. Geisterschiff. Franks felt a cold smile cross his face. Good. Let them be afraid. Let them waste torpedoes on ships that wouldn't sink. Let them go home with empty tubes and full damage reports. But the smile faded when he looked at his charts. They were still 800 miles from Britain. 3 more days of sailing through the most dangerous waters on Earth. The Wolfpack still had teeth, even if those teeth were getting duller. And the weather was turning. The barometer was dropping. A storm was coming. Tommy Chen appeared at his elbow, his face pale. "Sir, we just got a transmission from the Oglethorpe. The half-ship. She's asking for sailing instructions." "Sailing instructions?" "Yes, sir. Her captain says if they're going to make it to Liverpool anyway, they'd prefer to maintain proper convoy discipline." Frank sparked a laugh that was half hysteria. The James Oglethorpe, literally blown in half, wanted to maintain formation. Tell them they're cleared to proceed. Standard convoy spacing." As Chen walked away, Franks looked out at the gray expanse of ocean. Somewhere out there, 44 German submarines were hunting them. Somewhere above, the storm was gathering its strength and limping toward England. Refusing to die, refusing to quit, was a convoy of ghost ships, crewed by men who'd apparently decided that the Atlantic, the Nazis, and God himself would have to try harder if they wanted to stop them. The mathematics said they should be dead. The mathematics, for once, was wrong. The storm hit at 14 hours on March 18th. It came from the northeast like a freight train made of water and rage. Waves 40 feet high. Wind speeds that ripped antennas from masts and turned spray into horizontal bullets of ice. The kind of storm that made even experienced sailors pray to gods they'd stopped believing in years ago. Captain Franks had sailed through hurricanes that were gentler. All hands, secure for heavy weather. The order was almost unnecessary. Every man aboard the William Eustace knew what was coming. They'd seen the sky turn that particular shade of green-black. They'd felt the barometric pressure drop like an elevator with cut cables. But this storm had timing. Cruel, perfect timing. Because the damaged ships, the ones that had survived the torpedoes through sheer stubbornness and luck, were about to face a test that made the U-boats look merciful. The James Oglethorpe, the half-ship that had become a symbol of the convoy's refusal to die, was the first to break. Her captain, William Carlson, had kept her afloat through 18 hours of sailing with nothing forward of the bridge except empty ocean and twisted metal. His crew had pumped water, redistributed weight, and essentially performed surgery on a dying patient while that patient ran a marathon. But you cannot cheat physics forever. The first massive wave caught her port side and rolled her 15 degrees. She came back up, shuddering. The second wave hit her from a different angle. The storm had no pattern, no rhythm, just chaos, and the hull plates began to scream. Metal fatigue, they called it. as if metal could get tired, as if it could hurt. "Captain." The chief engineer's voice crackled over the internal phone. His name was Patrick Murphy, and he'd been at sea for 32 years. "She's breaking up, sir. The welds are going. I can hear them popping, like gunshots." Carlson looked at the 32 men under his command. 32 souls who'd survived the impossible, who'd kept this broken ship moving when every law of nature said she should rest on the ocean floor. He keyed the radio. "All ships, this is Oglethorpe. We're abandoning. Lifeboats in 3 minutes. Negative. Oglethorpe." It was Commander Luther on the Volunteer. "We cannot stop in these seas. Lifeboats will capsize in seconds." A long silence. Then Carlson's voice, steady as bedrock. "Understood, Commander. Then we'll have to ride her down. Oglethorpe out." Tommy Chen grabbed Franks' arm. "We have to do something." But Franks knew the mathematics of mercy. In these seas, attempting rescue would mean 2 ships lost instead of 1. The storm had created a situation where the only rational choice was to watch men die. Rational. Logical. Absolutely unbearable. "Full stop," Franks said quietly. "Sir?" "I said full stop, and prepare to launch rescue boats." "Captain, that's suicide." "Then it's suicide. Ring the engine room. Full stop, now." What happened next would be studied in maritime academies for decades, though never officially sanctioned or recommended. The William Eustace wasn't the only ship that stopped. The Matthew Lukenbach did too, her manually operated rudder swinging her into position. So did the Eland K, sailing at her permanent 15-degree list. 3 ghost ships, damaged and limping, creating a floating windbreak in hell. They formed a triangle around the dying Oglethorpe, using their hulls to create a pocket of slightly calmer water. Not calm. Nothing about this was calm, but survivable, maybe. The lifeboats launched into 40-foot swells. Volunteer crews, and they were all volunteers. Because Franks had asked for volunteers knowing it was a death sentence. Rode those boats like cowboys on mechanical bulls. Ropes snapped. 2 men were washed overboard and hauled back by their safety lines. 1 lifeboat capsized completely and had to be righted by hand. But they got there. God helped them. They got there. 32 men from the Oglethorpe were pulled from their dying ship. The last man off was Captain Carlson, who had to be physically dragged into the rescue boat by his chief engineer. As they pulled away, the James Oglethorpe finally gave up her ghost. She didn't sink dramatically. She just settled, slowly, almost peacefully, like an old man finally allowing himself to sleep. The stern section tilted, filled with water, and slipped beneath the surface with barely a sound that carried over the roar of the storm. She'd sailed 70 nautical miles as half a ship. She'd kept 32 men alive through the impossible. And in the end, she'd waited until they were safe before she let go. But the storm wasn't finished. Not even close. The U-boats had withdrawn. In these seas, submarines couldn't operate safely on the surface, and submerged attacks were impossible. But the Atlantic itself had become the enemy, and it was a more patient killer than any wolf pack. The Nereva, still burning after 2 days, was taking on water faster than her pumps could handle. Her captain made the call. Abandon ship. But the storm had other ideas. The first lifeboat launched successfully. The second hit a wave wrong and shattered like balsa wood. 17 men went into the water. Only 3 came back out. The Belgian crew, torpedoed twice and still sailing, finally found her limit. Her engine, which had been held together by wire, prayer, and Belgian stubbornness, seized up completely. Dead in the water in a force 10 gale. Her crew lashed themselves to whatever they could find and waited for the ocean to make its decision. For 6 hours, she rolled. For 6 hours, men held on with bleeding hands and broken fingers. For 6 hours, the Belgian crew took everything the Atlantic could throw at her. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the storm began to ease. Not calm, but calmer. The waves dropped from 40 feet to 20. The wind fell from 80 knots to 40. The sky went from black to merely dark gray. And through the murk, through the spray, and the exhaustion, the convoy saw something that made grown men weep. Land. Not Britain yet, but the Outer Hebrides, the islands that marked the approach to home. They'd made it to the coastal waters, to the range of land-based aircraft, to safety. Commander Luther on the Volunteer counted ships, 23. 23 out of the original 40. Damaged, listing, burning, jury-rigged, sailing on manual steering and prayers. But sailing. The Germans had thrown 44 submarines at them. The Atlantic had thrown its worst storm in 5 years. Together, they'd killed 17 ships and nearly 400 men. But 23 ships had refused to die. 23 ships, crewed by men who'd looked death in the face and said, "Not today. Not yet. We have cargo to deliver." The Belgian crew, her engines dead, was taken under tow by a British tug that had come out from the Hebrides. As they passed the William Eustace, someone on her deck raised a Belgian flag. It was torn, scorched, and stained with oil, but it flew. Captain Franks raised his own flag in return. The stars and stripes, equally battered, equally defiant. And ahead, barely visible through the mist, the coast of Britain waited. They'd made it. Against mathematics, against doctrine, against every reasonable expectation of survival, they'd made it. But the story of the convoy that refused to die wasn't over yet, because when they reached port, they discovered something that changed everything. Liverpool Harbor, March 22, 1943. The survivors of Convoy HX-229 limped into port like wounded soldiers returning from a war that the world had barely noticed. Tugboats guided them in. Dockhands stared in silence at the damage. Ships with holes in their sides. Ships listing at impossible angles. Ships held together by cables and courage. Captain Franks stood on the bridge of the William Eustace as they made berth. He'd been awake for 76 hours. His hands shook, his eyes burned. But he was alive. His ship was intact. His crew was whole. The harbor master, a retired Royal Navy captain named Whitmore, came aboard within minutes. He carried a clipboard and wore an expression that Franks couldn't quite read. Not relief, not congratulation. Something else. Something that looked almost like guilt. "Captain Franks," Whitmore said, offering his hand. "We need to talk." Privately. In the harbor master's office, Whitmore poured 2 glasses of whiskey that might have been older than both of them combined. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stared at a map of the Atlantic pinned to his wall, decorated with pins marking convoy routes and U-boat sightings. "Do you know what you did out there?" Whitmore finally said. "Survived," Franks replied. "Barely." "No, you broke them." Franks looked up, confused. Whitmore pulled out a folder marked with red stamps, "Most secret." Inside were decoded German naval transmissions, intercepted by British intelligence. He spread them across the desk. "We've been reading their mail for years now," Whitmore said quietly. "Ultra, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. This is information that could end the war if the Germans knew we had it. So what I'm about to tell you never leaves this room." Franks nodded. Admiral Donitz assembled that wolf pack specifically to prove a point. The Battle of the Atlantic was turning. Our convoys were getting better escorts, better tactics. The Nazis needed a decisive victory. Complete annihilation of a major convoy. Something that would break our spirit and convince Churchill that the Atlantic couldn't be held. Whitmore tapped the decoded messages. "These are communications from the U-boat commanders after the attack. U-523, U-526, U-600, all the boats in the Wolfpack. They're not claiming victory. They're asking for explanations. Some are demanding reassignment. 2 captains have requested psychiatric evaluation. I don't understand. They fired over 300 torpedoes at your convoy." 300. They scored direct hits on at least 43 ships. By every calculation, By every previous engagement in this entire war, they should have achieved 90% kills. They got 42%. Whitmore leaned forward. They don't understand what happened. They think their torpedoes are defective. They think your ships are using some new technology. Some of them think you had advanced damage control teams aboard. One U-boat commander wrote in his log that he believes the Allies have developed unsinkable merchant ships. Franks felt a cold laugh building in his chest. Unsinkable ships. We were held together with rope and luck. I know, but they don't. And here's what matters. Donitz has recalled the entire Wolfpack, all 44 boats. They're going back to port for refit and reassessment. He suspended his offensive operations in the mid-Atlantic until he can figure out what went wrong. The weight of those words settled over the room like snow. You bought us time, Whitmore said softly. Maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month. Time to reinforce other convoys. Time to deploy more escorts. Time to adjust our tactics. Your convoy didn't just survive. You changed the course of the Battle of the Atlantic. Franks thought about the men who hadn't made it. The 17 ships on the ocean floor. The nearly 400 souls who'd gone into the cold water and never come back up. It doesn't feel like victory, he said. It never does, Whitmore replied. Not in this war. But there was more. Over the next week, as the ships were inspected and repairs were assessed, naval engineers made discoveries that defied explanation. The L&K, which had sailed 700 miles with a 15-degree list, should have capsized in the first major wave. Her chief engineer's trick of flooding the ballast tanks should have made things worse, not better. The mathematics said it wouldn't work. The Matthew Luckenbach, steering manually with ropes and pulleys, had somehow maintained a course accurate to within 3 degrees. Experienced navigators said that was impossible with jury-rigged equipment in those conditions. Yet the records didn't lie. And the Belgian crew, the ship that took 2 torpedoes and a 6-hour pounding from the storm, was examined by a team of structural engineers from the Admiralty. Their report, which Franks was shown confidentially, contained a sentence that haunted him. This vessel should not exist in its current form. The structural integrity is insufficient to support the loads experienced. We cannot explain how it remained afloat. Tommy Chen had a theory. He shared it with Franks over drinks in a Liverpool pub 3 days after they docked. You know what I think? I think those ships stayed afloat because their crews refused to let them sink. I think stubbornness is a force of nature we haven't figured out how to measure yet. Franks wanted to dismiss it as poetry, as exhaustion talking. But he'd seen what he'd seen. He'd watched ships that should have died keep sailing. He'd watched men do impossible things because the alternative was unacceptable. Maybe Tommy was right. Maybe there was something beyond mathematics and physics. Maybe the human will to survive could, just occasionally, tell the universe to sit down and shut up. The story spread, though not in newspapers or official reports. It spread through the merchant marine community in whispers and late-night conversations. The convoy that refused to die became legend before it became history. 6 weeks later, Captain Franks received a letter. It was from Captain Carlson of the James Oglethorpe, the man who'd sailed half a ship 70 miles. He'd been given command of a new Liberty ship, the John Barry. His crew was half composed of survivors from the Oglethorpe. The letter was short. We know how to sail broken ships now. Let them try to stop us next time. There would be a next time, of course. The war had years left to run. More convoys would sail. More ships would sink. More men would die in cold water under dark skies. But something had changed in the mid-Atlantic that March. The U-boats had learned fear. The convoy system had learned resilience. And the men who sailed those ghost ships had learned something that couldn't be taught in any naval academy. They'd learned that sometimes the only difference between the dead and the living is the refusal to accept the verdict. Captain Robert Franks would make 11 more Atlantic crossings before the war ended. He would survive them all. On his desk, until the day he died in 1967, he kept a photograph of the James Oglethorpe whole, undamaged, taken before the convoy sailed. On the back, in his own handwriting, he'd written, "She sailed 70 miles as half a ship. We should all be so stubborn." The Battle of the Atlantic would continue for 2 more years. The Allies would lose thousands of ships and tens of thousands of men. But March 1943 marked a turning point. After Convoy HX-229, Admiral Dönitz never again achieved the concentration of force he'd assembled that night. His Wolfpack tactics became increasingly defensive. The hunters became the hunted. Historians would later call it the turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic. They'd cite improved radar, better escort tactics, long-range aircraft, and breaking the Enigma code. All of that was true, but the men who were there knew something else. They knew that sometimes victory doesn't come from superior technology or brilliant strategy. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people who simply refuse to die, who look at impossible odds and say, "Make me." The convoy that refused to die didn't win the war. But it proved something the Nazis never understood, that the human spirit, when properly motivated, doesn't sink, even when every law of physics says it should, even when the Atlantic itself demands it, even when 44 submarines and the worst storm in 5 years conspired to drag you down. Some ships refuse to die. Some men refuse to quit. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change the world.